And we're ready to resume. Is that correct, Ms. Corey?
We are, Your Honor.
And Mr. Stroller?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, ladies and gentlemen that are here in the courtroom, the attorneys have asked me to address you and mention something to you. I know Officer Rupert, my bailiff, mentioned this morning before we began court, as he does and has every morning, that everybody needs to remain silent and not talk and things of that nature, make sure phones are off and all that sort of thing. And also not have any outbursts of emotion. The next witness that's going to be called to the stand, is that door closed, please? Is the medical examiner, and I expect the testimony to include demonstrations perhaps, the showing of clothing items that was Jordan Davis's clothing from the night of the incident, and also photographs. These things can cause emotional reactions from folks, particularly family members, but even just general public. So I tell you that up front so you'll know and you'll have an idea of what may be coming in the next few minutes and over the next hour or so, and ask you again to please refrain from any verbal responses or outbursts or anything of that sort. If you feel that you are overcome with emotion and you cannot contain yourself, I would ask you to just please quietly excuse yourself from the courtroom so that we can continue and have no distractions during the testimony and something that might distract the jury. All right, so please, if you can indulge me in that regard, I'd appreciate it. We ready to proceed then, everybody?
The state is ready, Your Honor.
Mr. Stroller?
Yes, Your
All
Honor.
right. And Ms. Corey, you'll tell me when you want me to read the stipulation.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, bring the jurors on in then.
Jurors in court with.
All right, welcome back. And you can resume your seats, ladies and gentlemen. We're ready to begin with our next witness. Ms. Corey?
Yes, sir. Dr. Stacy Simons.
Dr. Stacy Simons. Good morning, doctor. If you'll come forward for us, please. And if you come right up here to the front and raise your right hand, the clerk will administer the oath to you.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you.
All right, doctor, if you'll come right around here and have a seat for us, please. And you can adjust that microphone as you need. And be sure and speak directly into it and loudly enough so we can all hear you. All right?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Corey?
Yes, Your Honor. State your name for the record.
Stacy Aileen Simons.
What is your profession?
I am a forensic pathologist.
Are you a duly licensed physician and surgeon?
Yes, I am.
How long have you been licensed in the state of Florida?
I've been licensed since 2011 in the state of Florida.
Are you licensed in any other states?
Yes, I am in the state of Washington since 2009.
Okay. Where did you receive your medical degree?
At New York Medical College, and I graduated in 2006.
Can you please give the jury a brief understanding of your continued education and training to become a medical examiner?
Yes, it's kind of a long course. After medical school, I did a 4-year residency program in combined anatomic and clinical pathology. And that was done the first year at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston and the last 3 years at the University of Washington in Seattle. I graduated and then moved on to a 1-year fellowship in forensic pathology, and that was done at the Miami-Dade County Medical Examiner, and I completed that year in 2011. After that, I started working professionally.
All right. And did you recently do a term with the Duval County Medical Examiner's Office, which is considered the 4th District ME.
Yes, I was employed there from July of 2011 until my resignation in January of 2014.
What is pathology?
Pathology is a specialized branch of medicine that identifies and diagnoses disease and injury.
What is forensic pathology?
So that is a pathologist who has even more specialty training, which allows them to conduct examinations and investigations in cases of violent death or suspicious death or sudden and unexpected death.
What is clinical pathology?
Clinical pathology is the study of body fluids to help diagnose disease and other entities.
Have you had study in all of those areas?
Yes,
Are you board certified in any of these areas?
I am board certified in anatomic and clinical pathology and also board certified in forensic pathology.
How many autopsies have you conducted or participated in your career?
Well, the total number of cases that I've worked on in my career is approximately 1,000 to 1,050, and of that, complete autopsies approximately 825 to 850.
Have you ever testified as an expert in pathology, forensic pathology, anatomic pathology, or clinical pathology in the courts of the state of Florida?
Yes, I have.
And having testified, were you allowed to render opinions as an expert in those same fields in the courts of the state of Florida?
Yes, I was.
How many times?
3 times.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time I would tender Dr. Simons as an expert in forensic, anatomic, and clinical pathology.
Mr. Stroller.
No objection.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, then Dr. Simons will be declared to be an expert in the area of forensic, clinical, and anatomical pathology. And as I mentioned earlier, that means she can offer an opinion in those fields.
Is it the practice of the medical examiner's office for each associate medical examiner to fully document each autopsy as it is performed?
Yes.
Are you all bound by Florida statutes as to what should be done in an autopsy?
Yes, we are.
And do you follow those statutes routinely for each autopsy?
Yes.
Does part of that require a toxicological exam be done on every person who is autopsied?
Well, specifically, statute indicates that if a violent death has occurred within 12 hours, if the autopsy occurs within 12 hours if a person dies within 12 hours of a violent incident, then you must perform a toxicological examination.
All right, ma'am. And are there people working with you throughout the medical examiner's office who do various parts of the autopsy with regard to bringing the body into your office, documenting clothing, performing the toxicology, etc.?
Yes, we have a regular staff with several departments that participate.
Do all of those persons make notes as part of the normal course of your business?
Yes.
Are all of those notes and reports then put into an official autopsy report?
Yes, they have.
Are photographs taken at the time of the autopsy?
Yes, they are.
Do those also become part of the official autopsy report?
They do.
Are items of physical evidence preserved and turned over to the law enforcement agency handling any particular criminal case?
Yes, they are.
Is an autopsy report kept forever at the medical examiner's office?
Yes, it is.
Was such a report made for Jordan Davis in this particular case?
Yes, it was.
Was there a specific medical examiner number assigned to his case?
Yes, there was. Judge, may I refer to my notes?
Yes, ma'am. Right, just reference them to refresh your recollection. Don't necessarily read from them.
Okay. So the case number assigned for Jordan Davis was 12-1982.
Right. And have you had an opportunity to review this file coming to court today?
Yes, I have.
When was the body of Jordan Davis brought to the medical examiner's office?
The body of Jordan Davis was brought into the medical examiner's office on the morning of November 24th, 2012 at 1:14.
And as part of your statutory duty, are you required to look at any hospital records that may pertain to a patient who died at the hospital and is then brought in for an autopsy?
Yes, we do get medical records, and those are reviewed.
And did you review the medical records from Shands Hospital pertaining to Jordan Davis?
Yes, I did.
At what time and on what date was Jordan Davis pronounced dead?
He was pronounced dead on the 23rd of November at 8:15 p.m.
Was there evidence of medical intervention by either Jack's Fire and Rescue or Shands Hospital?
Yes, there was.
And can you just briefly describe what was done for the jury?
Most prominently, there were 2 chest tubes, which are tubes that are inserted into the sides of the chest to either reinflate the lungs or remove blood. And there was an endotracheal tube, which is a tube to open an airway. And there was also a line that was placed in the front part of the left lower leg.
Does any of the medical intervention in any way inhibit your ability to perform a proper autopsy?
No, it does not.
Okay. I'm going to show you a photograph marked into evidence as State's Exhibit 138 and ask you, ma'am, do you recognize this?
Yes, I do.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask the court to read the stipulation and the jury instruction attendant to it.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, when lawyers agree that certain facts are true, that's called a stipulation of fact. You must accept the stipulated facts as having been proven. However, the significance of these facts, as with all facts, is for you to decide. In this case, the stipulated fact that I'm about to read for you that you must accept as true is the state of Florida, the defendant and his attorney, have hereby stipulated to the following. The body examined on November the 24th and 25th, 2012 by Dr. Stacy A. Simons, bearing the medical examiner's case number of 12-1982, is that of Jordan Davis.
And ma'am, again, I'll ask you, is your medical examiner number underneath Mr. Davis's chin in this photo for purposes of documentation?
Yes, it is.
And this photo was 138 for the record. Let me ask you, ma'am, before conducting the autopsy, was Jordan Davis measured for height?
Yes, he was.
What height was recorded for him?
5 feet and 11 inches.
Was Jordan Davis weighed?
Yes, he was.
Was he weighed with clothing or without clothing?
He was weighed in what we call the as-is state, which means in the body bag with some sheets and his clothing.
As he had come to you from the medical exam, from the Shands Hospital?
Exactly.
What was his weight with the clothing and the other items that were on the tray?
145 pounds.
Would you expect, based on your experience, that Jordan Davis weighed less than 145 pounds, considering the amount of clothing and sheets?
Yes, I would.
Where was the autopsy conducted?
At 2100 Jefferson Street in the morgue.
In addition to the autopsy that was performed, was there a toxicology screen done?
Yes, there was.
Explain the purpose of a toxicology screen to the jury.
So we look for anything from drugs of abuse to drugs that are prescribed but in inappropriate amounts, to alcohol, to anything over the counter that might also be detrimental.
Based on the toxicology report submitted for Jordan Davis, were there any drugs or alcohol found in his system?
No, there was nothing found.
Were there any external wounds to the body of Jordan Davis?
Yes, there were.
Did some of those wounds continue to the internal portions of his body?
Yes, they did.
What was the cause of Jordan Davis's death?
Multiple gunshot wounds.
And what was the manner of his death?
Homicide.
When the autopsy of the external portions of his body was conducted, was that on a different day from the autopsy of the internal portion?
Yes, it was.
And explain that to the jury, please, ma'am.
Jordan Davis died over the Thanksgiving weekend, and our office was closed for Thursday and part of Friday. We had an unusually busy weekend with many cases coming in and also run on a somewhat shortened staff. And so at the time that we received Jordan Davis and I accepted his case, I felt that it was in the best interest to give the case as much attention as possible, doing the external examination, the x-rays, and evidence collection on the first day, but then spending the time needed on the second day to do the internal examination.
And on what date did you conduct the internal examination of Jordan Davis's body?
That was on November 25th.
And did all of these things that we've mentioned, your exam, photographs, the toxicology, does all of that comprise the autopsy findings on which you base your opinion to this jury?
Yes, it does.
Okay. When Jordan Davis was brought in, I believe you said clothing was brought in with him. Is that correct?
Yes.
Let me show you States 139 in evidence And Dr. Simons, was this clothing collected by members of the medical examiner's office and turned over to the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office?
Yes, it was.
And under your direction and prior to your autopsy, was all of the clothing depicted here separately packaged as evidence?
It was removed from the tray, placed on this clean sheet, and then packaged separately as evidence.
All right. Let me then ask, Judge, I need a little bit of help now, please. I'm going to ask you and refer to your medical evidence receipt, if you need to, about several of the items of clothing that are depicted in States 139. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
Starting with Ms. Scott, if you'll help. Is there a hat depicted on this tray?
Yes, there is.
I'm going to have Mr. Guy show you what's been marked into evidence. Let me get my notes, please. Basically, State's Exhibit 171, is that the hat that was turned into you for Jordan Davis?
Yes,
All
it
right,
is.
Your Honor, may we display that to the jury?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Stroller, obviously, these are in, no objection.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you very much.
Okay.
We need to remove our stickiness, please, Mr. Judge, all they have on
And can you, I
Yes, sir.
appreciate you walking around with that microphone, but if you can speak into it, that would
Yes,
be
sir.
helpful too.
I would do that.
Thank you.
Dr. Simons, referring to your receipt, was Jordan Davis, was there clothing with him, a black tank top? I'm referring now specifically to States 172.
Yes, there was a black tank top.
And did you look at that tank top and lay it out to see if there was evidence of a gunshot through the tank top?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And Mr. Guy, if you could put that on this table for me, States 172, the black tank top. May the witness step down from the stand.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Simons,
And she may need a mic
she does
as
need her
well.
own microphone, please. And can we pull this over to the middle, please? Judge, can you inquire if the jurors can see this? And this will turn, but I just need to know, well, I know they can't see it with me in the way. But
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, can you all see that? Assuming that neither Ms. Corey nor the doctor stepped in front of it, obviously. You okay to see it from your angle there, everybody?
And we'll show it both ways, Your Honor.
Right.
Is it on? Dr. Simons, would you test your microphone?
Test, test.
All right. It's not on. Try it again. Would you test it again, please?
Test, test.
Do we need to check the volume on that? Do we know
Just
which
hold
one
on
that
one
is?
second.
Is it wireless what? I can change the volume.
What do you need, Judge, the number on it?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to try another one that's
Okay.
working. Test your microphone.
Nope.
Did you turn it on? It is on?
Mr. Smith, where do we find the number?
It's on. Okay. Just try to talk as closely to that as you can. For your purposes as a forensic pathologist, why would looking at the clothing to find evidence of a gunshot hole, how would that help you?
Well, we look at all the clothing to correlate that with the wounds. First of all, it helps us establish that there truly is a gunshot that penetrated through clothing and then into the body, but also sometimes it helps us establish position of the body.
Let me ask you, ma'am, did you find evidence of a gunshot hole through Jordan Davis's black tank top, States 172?
Yes, I did.
And can you please show the jurors on which side of the T-shirt you found evidence of a gunshot wound?
With this being the front and this being the back on the right side.
All right, and for the record, Judge, the front of the black T-shirt is facing the jurors as Dr. Simons testifies. Can you please turn this table to show the jurors that gunshot hole? Can you please point it out for them?
Let the record reflect she's angled it to that right side and is pointing for the jurors.
Dr. Simons, is it common for fire and rescue to have to cut clothing off of gunshot victims?
Yes, it is very
Tell
common.
the jury why they have to do that.
In an emergent situation, they are thinking about saving a life, and they are not thinking about preserving evidence because they assume that they're going to be able to save a life and that the evidence will take care of itself. And so they do what they need to do to access the body to administer medical care.
And on many of these items of clothing, did you see evidence that these items had been cut off by fire and rescue?
Yes, they had been.
All right. And Mr. Guy, if we could have State's Exhibit 173. And again, doctor, if you need to refer to the photograph or your notes, was there an olive T-shirt also collected from Jordan Davis?
Yes, there was.
Okay. We're going to try to have them ready in a row, Judge, with your permission.
Sure.
Have them ready to go. And I'll need 174, obviously, next, please. Doctor, does this T-shirt in States 173 show evidence of blood from Jordan Davis?
Yes, it does.
Okay, can you show the jurors where the blood is?
The blood is on the right side and also on the back. Some blood on the left side and coming around to the front.
Is there evidence that fire and rescue cut through this piece of clothing as well?
Yes, and that has been reapproximated or sewn back together.
Is there a gunshot hole in the same general vicinity as there was for the black tank top that was underneath this?
Yes, there is on the right side.
And can you turn that exhibit and show that to the jury as well? States, thank you, ma'am. And Mr. Guy will remove that for you. Can we pull out States Exhibit 175, the boxers? Doctor, was there a pair of Fruit of the Loom boxers that were taken from Mr. Davis's tray when his body came into your medical examiner's office?
Yes, there were.
Sarah, go help them get these items ready. Just go over there and have the tops off so they can come up quickly. All right, and Doctor, these displays are three-dimensional, is that correct?
Yes, they are.
And the clothing has been packaged where all four sides of the clothing can be seen, is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, in a few minutes, we'll be asking you questions about gunshot wounds to basically to the genital area or between the legs of Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Did you examine these boxer shorts to see if there was evidence of gunshots in that area?
Yes, I did.
And did you find any evidence of gunshots?
Yes, I did.
Can you show the jurors where you found them?
So currently the jury is looking at the front. I'm going to turn this around and you can see the back, or what we call the posterior aspect. And at the back on the seat is a hole.
Thank you, ma'am. States Exhibit 174, a black jacket, please. And Dr. Simons, was this black jacket brought in with the body of Jordan Davis?
Yes, it was.
Were you able to detect evidence of a gunshot hole in this black jacket?
Yes, I was.
And can you show the jurors where you found evidence of that?
Yes. So you're looking at the front, and again, the hole is on the right side. if you look for a small white hole over on the right, let's put it up here.
Doctor, let me ask you to assume the following facts. Please assume that young Jordan Davis was wearing a black tank top with the black tank top with the olive t-shirt on top of that with the black jacket on top of that. Based on your autopsy and a finding of a gunshot wound to his right side, do those bullet holes in these three items of clothing match up, and are they consistent with him having been shot through the right side while wearing this clothing?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And then just a couple more pieces of clothing and we'll let you resume the stand. Basketball shorts, states 176. And Dr. Simons, in reviewing this piece of clothing, did you find any evidence of a gunshot to this piece of clothing?
Yes, I did.
And where was that located?
So again, the jury is looking at the front right now, and I'll turn this around. The gunshot defect was in a similar location to the underwear, and that is on the back side, the posterior aspect, near the thigh. And it's a little difficult to see. It's a dark hole right at about this level.
And Dr. Simons, let me ask you to assume the following facts: that Jordan Davis had on the Fruit of the Loom boxers with these basketball shorts is what we're calling them, the
Yes.
shorts with the W on them. On top of that, do those two bullet defects line up?
They do seem consistent with each other, consistent with a wound on the inner posterior side of the right thigh.
And again, except for Mr. Davis's hat, do almost all of these clothing items bear evidence that fire and rescue had to cut them off of his body?
Yes.
To work on him. All right, and then one last exhibit, states 177, which would be the khaki long pants with the belt. And Dr. Simons, did these pants, states 177, come into your office with the body of Jordan Davis?
Yes, they did.
Is there significant cutting of this item of clothing?
Yes, there is.
And of course, for purposes of this display, has it been sewn back?
Yes, it has.
Were you able to find a specific bullet hole or holes that could align with the two bullet holes to his groin area?
I was not able to find anything in this case.
Are there cuts to that area of his clothing?
There are some defects that I do believe correspond to being in the area where he had wounds around the thighs.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Can you resume the stand for this portion? Dr. Simons, in documenting the injuries to the external portion of Jordan Davis's body, do you assign a number to each injury that you find?
I assign an arbitrary number, a number that I just assign.
Okay. Does it in any way reflect the order in which the shots penetrated or hit Jordan Davis's body?
No, it has no significance to the order in which the shots were fired or in which they hit his body.
How many separate gunshot wounds did you find to Jordan Davis's body?
3 gunshot wounds.
And based on your experience, are you able to determine whether a gunshot wound is a wound of entry or exit?
I am able to determine that based on characteristics, and in this case, there were characteristics that were pretty typical.
All right. I'm going to show you a series of photographs now, Doctor. States Exhibit 140. Is this the unclothed body of Jordan Davis for purposes of showing his physical characteristics?
Yes, it is, and also one of the benefits of this photo setup is it allows me just to explain very quickly what the anatomical position is, because you might be hearing that. It's how we document the height of the wounds, and the anatomical position is basically on your back, but with your hands out to the side. So more or less what you're seeing is a representation of the anatomical position.
All right, and just for purposes of further explanation, doctor, assume just for a moment that Jordan Davis suffered a gunshot wound to the middle of his chest. By anatomical position, you mean the jury would be able to see it as he lay there, is that correct?
Exactly, in the position laying on his back with his arms at his side, you would be able to see a gunshot wound to the chest right here.
Okay, but that would not mean he was lying down when the gunshot wound entered his chest, would it?
No, the problem with the anatomical position is most people who are living and moving are very rarely in that position, and so it has little to do with where they were at the time they might have been shot.
Are there other ways for you to try to determine the position in which the body was when it was shot?
Yes, we combine both what we see at autopsy and the path of injury in the body, also entrances and either exits or the location of the bullet. And then we look and see where the bullets seemed to go at the scene of the incident.
Yes, ma'am. Let me show you states 141 in evidence, and in relation to Jordan Davis's upper body, does that show the penetrating gunshot wound that you denoted as number 1?
Yes, it does.
Can you circle that on this photograph for the jurors?
Yes.
And what is the little white sticker underneath that?
That is an identification tag that we use so that it identifies specifically that wound to this case number. And when we do close-ups, because you wouldn't be able to see Jordan Davis's face, you would know that that wound belonged to this case.
Do you measure both the location of the wound from the top of his head and from the midline, the center of his body, as well as the size of the wound itself?
Yes, we do that.
Tell the jurors the measurement from the top of Mr. Davis's head for this particular wound.
The wound was 59 centimeters below the top of the head, and
I'm sorry, go ahead, from midline.
it was 22 centimeters to the right of midline.
What was the entrance size of the bullet that entered Mr. Davis's body at this location?
Are you asking about the abrasion size?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the overall wound was 1 5/10 centimeters by 1 centimeter.
And what is the shape of the defect to his body caused by the bullet?
The shape of the defect is oval.
If the shape of the defect was round, would that be significant for your purposes in analyzing this gunshot wound?
Yes,
Explain to the jury.
a round defect would have a different significance than an oval defect. There are two possibilities for the oval defect in this case, and I think that they actually both come into play. Oval means that instead of a bullet hitting at a perpendicular angle and going straight in, where the abrasion around it would be completely circular and uniform, it hit at an angle, or what we would call some sort of tangent, and caused an abrasion that was more prominent on one end than it was on the other. So in one sense, it helps us determine an angle. And in another sense, there are irregularities within the abrasion itself. And first let me explain what we call an abrasion in forensic terms is really just a scrape. And so in this case, it's the bullet scraping along the skin and causing basically a scrape. But in this particular case, I believe that irregularities in the abrasion itself and then the actual center defect that the bullet poked through, where it's kind of an irregular shape, might also indicate that the bullet was deformed before it entered his body.
And tell the jurors the difference between a penetrating wound by a gunshot and a perforating wound by a gunshot.
So we call a wound penetrating when the bullet goes into the body but doesn't exit out of the body and stays within the body. And we call it perforating when it goes in one end and comes out the other and we don't have that bullet anymore.
All right. And you did say this is a penetrating wound, is that correct?
This is a penetrating wound.
States 142, if you will explain this to the jury, please, ma'am.
So this is a close-up of the entrance wound that we were just looking at on the right side of the abdomen. The irregular aspect that I was talking about from the central defect kind of dips along like this, and irregularities to the abrasion itself are right here. But otherwise, it is the oval that I described.
Is this wound consistent with a medium to large caliber bullet being fired into Mr. Davis?
Yes, it is.
State's Exhibit 143, did you apply a measure to this wound?
Yes, I did.
And can you tell the jury what the measurement type is at the top and along the side?
So we use what's called an ABFO ruler, and that's basically the American Board of Forensic Odontology. It's a uniform scale that can be used in photographs, and it allows anything in centimeter increments to be measured from one photo to the other, where if you enlarge the centimeter to be the same in each photo, then you can make a direct comparison of size from one photo to another.
Dr. Simons, do you have people who help you with the autopsy do x-rays of bodies to look for projectiles?
Yes, they do.
And was that done for Jordan Davis?
Yes, it was.
Let me show you States 144 in evidence and ask you, Doctor, is this an x-ray of Jordan Davis's upper chest?
Yes, it is.
And does this show the projectile?
Yes, it does.
Did you recover that projectile?
I did.
And can you please, ma'am, circle the projectile on this x-ray?
Yes, I can. This is the projectile. And if possible, I would like to take a moment and use this x-ray to also explain the path of travel and what exactly the jury is looking at.
I would like for you to do that, and you may draw on this by using your finger, and can you also explain every portion of Jordan Davis's body that this gunshot wound penetrated?
Yes, I will do that. So what you're looking at is an x-ray of Jordan Davis, again in the anatomic position. So this is the left side of his body, and so I've just drawn a line over his left arm. Now I'm drawing a line over his right arm.
Can you just put an L and an R just
Yes.
to...
So we have an L that we keep in the x-ray, either an L or an R, and here we have an R. Now what you're looking at here is the spinal column. Each of these is a rib, and these are the collarbones. This is Jordan Davis's heart. In this area, we have the left lung, and in this area, we have the right lung. What you're looking at here, everything that I've drawn in this area is the chest cavity, and at this point, we see a defining line, and that is the border of the liver and the diaphragm, which separates the chest cavity from the abdominal cavity.
All right.
And so in this instance, we have the projectile as I've circled.
And doctor, if you're ready to do the path, I'm going to ask them to change the color to a different color.
Great, thank you.
Okay, could you just put another color up there for the path of the bullet?
Okay, so are they ready?
One
Not
moment.
yet.
Okay.
Just give them a second.
Any color, yellow. Doctor, touch the screen and make sure it's a different color. Okay.
Okay, so the injury actually begins slightly below the border of this x-ray. So I'm going to start just slightly below the border, but I am down now on the right side, which would be if you took your left hand and put it at the bottom corner of the x-ray, that's where I'm starting. So right about here is where the bullet entered. And it entered at the actual border of the chest and abdomen and came in and perforated the 10th rib, which is the border. On the inside of that rib, we have the diaphragm, as I mentioned, and so the bullet then proceeded to perforate the diaphragm before it entered the liver, went through the liver, from the lower right to the upper middle, and then perforated the diaphragm again. Over here, it perforated the right lung and continued on behind the heart and in front of the spinal column to perforate the aorta. Now, the aorta is the large artery that carries all the blood from the heart to the body. Continued past the aorta and perforated the upper portion of the left lower lung lobe. Continued on and caused fractures in the left fifth rib and a smaller fracture in the left sixth rib, and then exited through the ribs and came to rest in the below the skin, in between the ribs and the skin, near the left armpit.
Okay. And doctor, showing you now, State's Exhibit 145, is that the bullet that you recovered from the upper chest of Jordan Davis's body?
Yes, it is.
And did you package that and designate it as the left chest wall?
Yes, I did.
And let me also show you State's 146. Tell the jury why you took 4 photos of that particular item.
Well, we normally take 4 photos so that we have a reference to the degree of how deformed that bullet was. In this case, I call the bullet mildly to moderately deformed because when you look at several parts of the bullet, they're actually really in very good condition. Some of the aspects that can be used are the sides, which are down here, and the base. But then what we call the nose, which is the tip of the bullet, is quite deformed. So we do this for reference.
And then, doctor, showing you next, State's Exhibit, well, let me go back then. Hold on 1 minute. And I will State's Exhibit 190 in evidence and ask you, ma'am, is this the projectile that you recovered from the left chest of Jordan Davis? May she step down, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Simons, if you would show this to the jury, please. Are you checking your medical examiner packaging?
Well, I'm also just checking.
Is that
Pattern.
microphone on? Yes, it is, okay.
I'm also checking the pattern of the flaring of those petals.
Yes, ma'am.
So this is a secondary packaging. This is not my packaging.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and is my packaging inside?
Yes, ma'am. Your packaging should be there.
Okay. So this is my signature and my packaging.
And is that the exact packaging that's depicted in the photos you just described to the jury?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And although some of the petals look slightly different to me, that it might be part of the analysis.
Yes,
So-
ma'am. And if you would just display that for the jury.
So I've looked at the bullet and then the packaging.
And doctor, I think if you would talk towards your microphone, I think it would pick your voice up, and thank you.
Okay, I think I'm
All
on
right,
the
may I
flip side.
display, Your Honor, to the jury?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Simons, would this bullet going through Jordan Davis's body at the angle that you've just explained to this jury, damaging all the internal portions of his body that you just explained, have been fatal all by itself to Jordan Davis?
Yes, it would.
Okay. You can resume the stand. I have more photographs to show you, please, ma'am. And let me ask you for just a second to go on to gunshot wound number 2, what you refer to as a penetrating gunshot wound of his left thigh.
Yes.
All right, let me show you States. I should probably stay here. That's okay. 147 in evidence. We need the blue marks removed, please. Just hit the blue marks. Thank you. And doctor, is this the groin area of Jordan Davis?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and what is the silver, the reason we're showing this to you first before the other photos that show more of an area, is there's a silver piece of metal there, is that correct?
That's correct.
And what is that silver piece of metal?
And that is a bullet fragment.
Okay, and did you remove that at some point?
Yes, prior to washing the body, I did remove and have that photographed.
Okay, did you designate that fragment as being fragment left groin skin?
Yes.
As shown in States 148?
Yes,
And
that's
is that
correct.
your packaging from the medical examiner's office?
Yes, it is.
Then I'm going to show you, and actually, doctor, well, I can pull this out. Give me 1 moment. I'll bring it up to you. States Exhibit 191, is this that fragment from the left groin area of Jordan Davis's body? You can examine the packaging.
This is my packaging. I do believe it's similar in size, and not being able to look at all angles, I think it's consistent with.
Doctor, is it unusual for a small metal fragment to just sit on top of an open wound like that?
I wouldn't say that it's unusual. I've found them in several gunshot wounds, and sometimes they catch on a piece of skin, and that's how it happens, and sometimes they're just tucked slightly underneath the skin.
Yes, ma'am. Let me ask you then, after removing that fragment, did you go on to analyze this particular gunshot wound to Jordan Davis?
Yes, I did.
Let me ask you to look at States 149, and can you orient the jury to this photo? Obviously, for dignity and for purposes of court, we have two things hiding part of Jordan's body. The lower beige square, what does that cover?
So that's going to cover the posterior portion towards the anus.
Okay, and the upper square, does that cover his,
That covers part of his scrotum.
part of his scrotum? So is Jordan Davis, can you tell the jurors how they are looking at this photo to understand these gunshot wounds?
I can. I mean, it might be easier if I were to show you on myself, if that's acceptable.
Is that all right with the court?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you're light enough to sit on this table, so I'm going to ask you to do it from this table. We don't have a chair with no arms. John, can you just move this up for me, please?
It's a somewhat difficult photo to understand, and so I think it just becomes very simple if I show you what you're looking at. If you are looking at me, it's the same as looking at the photo. And basically, if you're looking on the left side of the photo, the skin you're seeing comes from the inner or medial portion of Jordan Davis's right thigh. Then what you see, where we pointed out the scrotum, at the top or back end is the perineum, and I'll explain that in a moment. And then on your right side would be the inner or medial aspect of Jordan Davis's left thigh.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. So as we look at this photo, does it show aspects of both the penetrating gunshot wound of the left thigh and the perforating gunshot wound of the right thigh?
Yes, it actually shows
All right,
both.
then I'd ask you to put an L and an R for the left wound and the right wound. And we will come to the right wound later. So for purposes of the next few photographs in your testimony, can the jury just sort of hold off on those farthest two holes into Mr. Davis's body?
Yes, and just before I forget, I do want to explain the term perineum. Basically, that is a region of skin that is between the genitals, which are at the front or the anterior aspect, and the anus, which is at the back or the posterior aspect.
Right in the middle of the perineum, you're holding in your tweezers the little tag that has Mr. Davis's ME number. What is that wound?
So that wound is what I just call a defect. I can't exactly call it a graze wound, but it does not have any depth to it. I cannot stick a probe in and attach it to either the wound on the left thigh or the wound on the right side. It basically just is a very shallow defect of skin.
If a man, due to this part of his anatomy, is in a seated position, could that defect have occurred as a result of a bullet?
Yes, it could have.
And could it have occurred and looked like this because the skin folds in that area when in the seated position?
Yes, some of these wounds are a little bit more complicated and a little less typical because when a bullet goes over or enters through folded skin, especially thin skin, it has a different appearance than, for example, the wound that we might see over the leg or chest elsewhere.
On Jordan Davis's left thigh, did you find a gunshot wound of entry that is separate and apart from that defect you just talked about?
Yes, I did.
Can you circle the gunshot wound of entry? Can you tell the jurors how you know that is the entry wound?
So the small fragment that we just looked at in the prior photo came from that, and because that wound was a defect that I could put a probe through and had a track that progressed along to the outer aspect of the left thigh, the lateral aspect of the left thigh, where there was a bullet, we know that that was the entrance wound.
And did you recover a bullet
Yes,
that's connected to this injury?
Yes, I did.
And doctor, what was the wound track inside Jordan Davis's body? In which direction did that bullet travel?
So that bullet traveled from right to left, and so if you think about it, even though we're talking about the left leg, we're moving from the right side of the left leg to the left side of the left leg.
Can you say from the inside of the left leg towards the outside of the left leg? Would that help some?
Yes, the inside of the left leg towards the outside of the left leg, absolutely.
And that bullet did not exit Jordan Davis's body, is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you use an X-ray to assist you in locating that bullet?
Yes, I did.
Let me show you State's Exhibit, State's Exhibit 150 is just below that gunshot wound of entry. What type of a wound is that in between the measure and the ME number?
And so I'll circle the wound, and again, that's an abrasion. It's a scrape of some sort. It could have been from something directly hitting the skin or hitting the clothing on top of the skin.
All right. State's Exhibit 151, is that the X-ray of Jordan Davis's right and left thighs?
Yes, it is. So again, this is taken in the anatomic position. We have the left side and we have the right side. And so over here, we're looking at the pelvic bones. And then we have the right femur or thigh bone, and we have the left femur and thigh bone. Now this is our area of scrotum and perineum, and so our entry is somewhere around here, and we see a path to a projectile here. The other value of this X-ray is to show that there was not a fracture of the femur by the bullet.
And doctor, would this wound alone have been fatal to Jordan Davis?
I don't believe alone that this would have been fatal, but I do believe that it was a debilitating wound and contributed.
All right. And doctor, is it unusual to find when a bullet is fired through a vehicle and into a human being that the bullet can fragment so that you find what you've described as the small metal piece at the entry and a full jacket, a bullet jacket inside?
Yes, and I think, although sometimes a bullet will actually break apart when it goes through a vehicle, sometimes it doesn't. And in this particular case, the amount of deformity of the bullet was much more than it would have been had it just gone through soft tissue, meaning muscle, nerves and vessels of the thigh. So it's very consistent with having hit something hard first.
Let me show you what's been marked into evidence as States 192 and ask you, Dr. Simons, is that the bullet you recovered from Jordan Davis's thigh?
Yes, it is.
And could you please display that to the jury?
Yes.
Thank you. You can just leave it on that table for now. And I'll ask you to look at your monitor when you resume the stand. And looking now at State's Exhibit 152, thank you, is that how you documented the recovery of that particular bullet?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And State's 153, is that 4 views of that bullet?
Yes, it is.
Is this bullet consistent with a medium to large caliber bullet?
Yes, it is.
And States 154, does this depict the packaging of both of those bullets so that there's no confusion about which bullet came from which location in Mr. Davis's body?
Yes.
Okay. And doctor, the wound path here, I believe you said was right to left?
That's correct.
On that thigh?
On that thigh.
Okay. And was it in any front to back that you could detect?
In this case, there was a slight front to back. But I could not tell if it went up or down at all with any level of certainty. And in those cases, when I can't tell with any level of certainty, then I'd rather not give an inaccurate measurement. And so I say that it can't be determined.
All right, doctor. And then I'd like to go ahead, if it's all right with you, and discuss the gunshot wound number 3 since it's in the same area, and I'll have some questions on both. Is that all right with you?
Yes.
Then let me show you States 155 in evidence, and can you explain this photograph to the jury?
Yes, so this is a photo with Jordan Davis now laying on his stomach, and it gives a slightly better view of the entrance wound of the path on the right inner thigh. So what you're looking at here is the entrance wound, and you can just see a small amount of the exit wound. And this was what we were looking at in the previous photo when I showed you on myself and we saw the inner aspect of Jordan Davis's right thigh.
Now, when you say it entered, and the next wound that you can barely see that you've circled, that is the actual exit, is that correct?
I believe from this photo that that is part of the exit.
And doctor, assuming that Jordan Davis was clothed and that this gunshot occurred while he was sitting in a car, perforated and exited his body, when his clothing was cut off, could the projectile have fallen out at that point?
Yes, it could have.
Let me ask you then, ma'am, what are the other two injuries that are seen on the mid portion of Jordan Davis's back thigh and up on his back? Can you go ahead and explain those to the jury?
So on the back portion of the right thigh, it is what I call a patterned abrasion. And when you look at it face on, it's actually in the shape of a rectangle. And when anything has a specific shape or pattern, then we try and identify it as such so that if anything is ever brought up later, we can determine whether or not we have the object that caused that.
Can you directly link this particular injury to a gunshot itself?
I can't.
Okay. And what about the one on the small of his back?
And so there's another abrasion, and this did not have a pattern to it. It was just a small, dark abrasion.
All right. Doctor, let me now take your attention to States 156 in evidence. And again, the beige-colored square covers what portion of Mr. Davis's body?
So again, we've covered the scrotum. Now just to orient you a little bit to the photo, this is the right thigh moving towards the feet. This is the left thigh moving towards the feet. The scrotum would be here. Belly button would be up here. And so this is the wound on the perineum that you saw.
And is that the wound that you said could be part of folded skin or anything else? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
There was no penetration into Jordan Davis's body through that particular wound?
No, and there was also no hemorrhage in either the testicles or the scrotum.
All right. Then let me ask you to focus this jury in the last, I'm going to go back to the last picture very quickly. And doctor, the oval defect that's just above the medical examiner number, is that the gunshot wound of entry for this third bullet?
Yes, it is.
And can you circle that in this photo as well?
And if it helps and you want to go back, there's a skin crease that is also good for a frame of reference.
All right, let's give the jury that frame of reference. Can you show them the skin crease? Okay. So the skin crease and the oval defect is what helps the jury determine that that is the entrance wound you're referring to.
Yes,
Okay,
just to show
and
that
then
they're
going
one and the
back to
same.
156, can you show the jurors that as well?
Okay, so this is the skin fold, and here was our entrance wound.
And that bullet perforated but did not penetrate his body, is that correct?
That's correct.
Show the jurors the exit.
And this is the exit.
And doctor, is it possible for a bullet to just traverse that short of a portion of a human being's body?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And in this particular case, did you measure this wound of entry?
I did.
And what was the measurement?
Overall, including the abrasion, it was 1 5/10 centimeters by 1 1/10 centimeter.
And is that consistent with a medium to large caliber bullet such as a 9mm?
Yes, it was.
All right. And doctor, if Jordan Davis had been clothed and that clothing had been cut off at the scene and a projectile had fallen out of there, would that be unusual as far as you can tell based on the type of wound you see here?
No.
Okay. Let me then ask you, would this wound alone have been fatal?
No.
Okay. Doctor, let me show you States 157 in evidence, and can you tell the jurors the purpose of that photograph?
And that's just an additional close-up showing more detail on that entrance wound. This is the margin of abrasion. This is part of the defect of where the bullet perforated through, and this is an edge where we have the skin that the bullet went under to continue its track.
Dr. Simons, again, is it an oval shape because of the way the bullet entered the body as
Yes.
opposed to a direct hit?
Yes, it is.
And are you able to determine the order in which these shots were fired into Mr. Davis's body?
I'm not.
Is there a way, and let me take you now to States 158, the purpose of the dowel is for what?
That's just to show that the entrance wound that we were just looking at and the exit wound that we saw were in continuity, but also that it's a very shallow wound. You can see a little bit of the skin lifted up by the probe. Just didn't go deep at all.
All right, and I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple more photographs before I ask the remainder of the questions. This is a black and white photo of one of Jordan Davis's organs. Is that correct?
That's correct. This is a photograph in black and white of Jordan Davis's liver.
And why is this picture significant for your explanations to the jury?
Well, so this picture is very significant because there is a large wound tract, or a very obvious wound tract through the liver that demonstrates that angle that I showed you on the x-ray that went from the lower right portion of the liver to the upper middle portion of the liver and then continued on through the lungs and the aorta. And so the injury that was caused by the bullet is actually this kind of channel here, this irregular channel. You're looking at the back of the liver, and so just to orient you, this is the top part of the liver, closest to the head. This is the bottom part of the liver, closest to the feet. This is the right side of the liver, and this is the left side of the liver. And this would be about where, roughly where the spinal column is. So you have the bullet, as I showed you on the x-ray, that traveled sort of from the lower right portion towards the upper middle portion, then continued on to the right lung lobe, the aorta, etc. And the benefit of having it so nicely shown in one single organ is it allows us to help establish Jordan Davis's position within the rear passenger compartment.
All right. And doctor, let me show you one more photograph before I ask you about Jordan Davis's position when he was shot. State's Exhibit 160, is that a photo of the black shirt laid out at your office as well as a close-up of the bullet hole?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and is that the black shirt you've testified to here in court today?
Yes, it is.
Doctor, before I go on to these other photos, let me ask you, ma'am, if the position of Jordan Davis at the time he sustained these 3 gunshot wounds were at issue, would it aid you in your testimony to the jury to use a bendable form with dowels to show all 3 wounds in relation to each other?
It would.
Your Honor, at this time I'd ask permission to use a bendable form that we use for purposes of the doctor's demonstration.
Mr. Stroller?
I have rejected this time, I'll just wait and see, Judge.
Okay?
All right.
We get it for me? Yes, whatever y'all want to do. I need just 1 second, Judge, to bring it in.
Yes, ma'am.
Put this back in for me, yeah, and then I'm going to move this off there. Dr. Simons, I want you to presume that this jury has seen photographs and heard testimony about the car and gunshot wounds that went through the door where Jordan Davis was seated. And I want you to further assume that Jordan Davis was inside the door when the gunshot wounds hit him. So my question to you is, would this bendable form aid you in showing the possible position of Jordan Davis's body when these gunshot wounds went through him?
It would. I'm going to just sort of give a disclaimer. I believe that I'm going to give you a demonstration again with my own body because I'm more limber than the mannequin. And then we will also use the mannequin because I don't want probes through my leg. So.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That would be a good thing. So
Okay.
Doctor, if you'll come down to this table again, and I want you to start with gunshot wound number 1, which was the penetrating gunshot wound of the chest.
Okay.
Judge, permission?
Yes.
Thank you.
And before, are you all on the corner over there where that table is placed? Are you going to be able to see the doctor if she sits on it? You okay? All right.
All right. Dr. Simons, please.
Okay, so I actually think I'd like to do, if we're talking about wound number 1, I'd like to do a demonstration for you standing really quickly. I think it's the simplest way to do it. Given that the track of the bullet that I feel went through the chest was kind of horizontal, roughly parallel to the ground or to the floor of the car. If you think about the wound that entered on the right side of the abdomen, If you were to have a bullet going straight across the body, you could see from my arm that the bullet would roughly land on the left side in a similar place that it started on the right side. But what we have instead is something that's more like this angle, the bullet starting down at the right and ending up near the left armpit. And so in the anatomic position, the bullet would have either had to come from down on the ground as a ricochet, which there's no evidence of that, or from a shooter that was coming from lower. But we know we're dealing with a horizontal track of the bullet. The way that that can happen is by motion of the body. And if you notice now, as I start to bend over, the track becomes horizontal. And so that path in the liver and the path of the injury helps us establish that Jordan Davis was most likely bending over in a position similar to this.
And when you say bending over, you're leaning to your left.
Leaning.
And go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yes, leaning to my left, possibly forward, not necessarily forward though.
Right. And let me ask you this. In order to get the wound track that you have testified to here in your expertise, in any other position, the shooter would have had to have been inside the car and below Mr. Davis's body. Is that correct?
That is correct.
If he was sitting upright in the car?
That is correct.
Okay. What about if he was standing outside the car?
If he was standing outside of the car, then that's when the other two potential possibilities, such as a ricochet or the shooter being below. But you know, normally there's evidence of a ricochet. They have what we would call a strike mark, where the bullet hits the ground or another object and then bounces back up. But the bullet would have been, in my opinion, much more deformed than it actually was.
And also, Doctor, can you enlighten this jury as to whether or not that would be possible in light of the other two wounds that are to the inside of Jordan Davis's groin area?
I cannot think of a way to reconcile those, and I also can't think of a way to reconcile them based on, you know, the number of shots and things like that. I cannot think of a way.
Right, assuming that the shots were fired boom, boom, boom.
Right, and you know, and so as I think of these shots occurring, this is one of the problems with a mannequin, and so I'm gonna just explain this to you, and I have to stop myself from doing the same thing. We like to want to find a position that accounts for all three shots in one single position, but you know, you think about the response time and hearing a shot and then another shot and then another shot, you would start to respond, and you would have time to respond and move your body, maybe try and, you know, make some sort of evasive maneuver, try to get out of the car, try and move away from where you hear the shots coming from. And then, so you've got a momentum, and that's propelling your body, and then you've also got a point at which you may have been struck and you might have fallen over, tipped over, something like that. And so you have to think of it in terms of possibly one shot and then another shot and then another shot with the body changing position.
All right, and Doctor, can you demonstrate on yourself those other two wounds?
So, you know, from what I can see, and I'm going to show you again the wounds that we've discussed, what we called wound number 2, coming in the inner left thigh to the point where the bullet landed, somewhere along the outer left thigh. And then we have another shot that I did demonstrate here, but that here translates to here and here, okay? And so if you want to try and put those, again, in a somewhat horizontal plane, kind of like what we see when we look at the shots of the door with the probes through them, you can think of the body now either, if I'm sitting in a passenger compartment, I've got a door here, I've got a seat behind me, and I've got a seat in front of me. So I might try and flee by going like this, and now I've shifted my body forward and a little bit down. It also starts to lift my thigh up, and as two bullets come in, we can have a bullet coming in horizontally and going across the left thigh. And then perhaps as I start to fall or tip over, we have another bullet that comes in and enters what we think of as traditionally the back, but in this case, you know, it's just coming in and doing what we've already seen, coming in and then heading horizontally. Another possible position is like this. And again, you know, there's no way for us to know exactly where he was, but you can see that there's a range of motions that would probably account for at some point in time all three of those bullets.
But Dr. Simons, is it fair to say, unless Jordan Davis is in one of these positions you've just demonstrated, the shooter would have had to been below him and between his legs. Is that correct?
Yes, probably.
Okay. Let me ask you also, Dr. Simons, in order for the jury to understand these 3 gunshots in relation to each other, would you now be able to use this bendable form with the dowels?
I will.
And obviously, we're not going to ask you to do anything with the arms, and his arms are not quite controllable. So if you would just focus on the 3 areas of the gunshot wounds. And I want you to assume, for purposes of this demonstration, that this is the back seat, passenger side of the vehicle in which Jordan Davis was seated. Assume further that the shooter is approximately where I am located, firing shots from this distance or slightly further at Jordan Davis with a 9mm Taurus pistol. Can you show the jurors how you can account for the path of those bullets through his body, starting with gunshot wound number 1?
Our only objection that it's not to scale. And at this point, you know, we have a Volkswagen to a Durango. Nothing's to scale. And I have Ms. Corey saying, assume this, assume that, but it's not to scale.
Well, it's
I
a
understood.
hypothetical.
Sorry.
No, I was telling Ms. Corey not to speak while you're
Yes, sir.
speaking.
I understood the demonstration by herself, but at this point,
Objection,
it's not to scale.
grounds, not to scale.
Improper, not to scale.
It's a hypothetical to help the jury understand the doctor's testimony.
And I believe the jury understands that that's what it is, and obviously, it's not apples to apples, but it's a demonstrative aid, so the objection is overruled.
Proceed, Dr. Simons.
So to demonstrate the first wound, which we see with this pink probe. Now, I would like to clarify that the bullet did stop in the body. So this is not meant to imply that the bullet exited the body. It's just really to show you that same track. So we start at the lower right side, at the abdomen chest border, and we head back up again, and somewhere near the axilla, you could see if he was sitting upright in the anatomic position, we'd have that upward direction. But again, as he might move down and away, we see that this starts to become horizontal and more closely matches the path that we see of the probes through the door.
All right, and doctor, if Jordan Davis were sitting straight up, based on your actual examination of his body or the demonstration you're doing here, the shooter would have had to be down and at this angle, firing up to achieve that angle through his body. Is that correct?
That's my opinion.
Yes, ma'am. Go on to the other 2 wounds, please.
And I would, again, like to handle each of these wounds separately
Yes,
because
ma'am.
I don't believe that they could have occurred at the same time. In this case, we'll look at the leg. I do believe that in one of the positions that I showed you, I had my leg kind of twisted and I was sort of trying to raise myself up out of the seat to move away. And again, as you see this path that goes more or less in this direction, as the body starts to tip, you see how, or as the leg starts to tip, you see how this path can be coming in and become, again, roughly horizontal.
All right. And again, doctor, if Jordan Davis were standing up outside the car, the shooter would literally have to be lying on the ground shooting up between his legs. Is that correct?
Well, I would say, yeah, at that same angle. I don't know that it was, I think in the probes, there might have been a slight horizontal to downward angle,
Yes, ma'am.
but not upward in the same way that the chest shot was.
Yes, ma'am. And then the 3rd wound?
And then the third one, see if we can get this to sort of come back around. As I mentioned to you earlier, again, this is roughly in a horizontal position to begin with, and one of those lower probes could have come right in initially, either with this leg up in the air or this leg down farther, giving a clear shot, clear access to this probe.
All right. Thank you, doctor.
Thank you.
You can resume the stand, please. Leave that there for just one moment. And doctor, let me ask you this. I'm sorry, I'll wait till you get back up there. Would it additionally aid you in your testimony to the jury to be able to refer to the actual location of the gunshots as they entered the vehicle where Jordan Davis was sitting?
I think that's helpful.
Okay. Let me show you then, ma'am, State's Exhibit 93 in evidence and ask you to orient yourself to the back right passenger's seat.
Yes, and so we're looking down on the car. This would be the roof. This would be the hood. This would be the front passenger door and the rear passenger door.
All right. And assuming that those dowels were placed through there where the bullets entered the back passenger door, exited the interior of the back passenger door, and then entered Jordan Davis's body, are those consistent with the 3 bullet wounds you've described to Jordan Davis here today?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Let me show you State's Exhibit 97, which is a view of those same dowels from the interior of the vehicle. Starting with the top dowel, is that one consistent with the gunshot wound to the right side of Jordan Davis that traversed his body all the way through his aorta and landed in his chest?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and the lower 2 shots, the lower dowels, it looks like there's one in the middle and one below, but are those consistent with Jordan Davis's position leaning towards the other side of the car and those bullets entering at that height into the car and into the interior of his legs in the groin area?
Yes, they are. I'm not sure if we have another shot that shows. Okay.
Okay. You want me to go on to the other shot?
Yeah, I think that would be
Let
helpful.
me take you then to States 95. Does this help you explain to the jury?
It does. And so you can see this is a little bit higher up. And again, you can sort of get a rough estimate as to where on the seat he might have been, what level his chest is, although we don't know how far back he was seated. He might have been a little bit forward. So I believe that this is consistent with the shot that traversed the upper portion of the body. These, I do believe, are consistent with the shots that entered the thighs. It'd be hard for me to know exactly which was which, and although from this view it does look like there's very little clearance, sort of mentally we have to account for the fact that he's going to have some weight and he's going to depress the seat a little bit, and the fact that we also don't know where along this probe his thigh was, so at what point the bullet actually entered his body rather than continuing on.
And doctor, is that first shot, as it appeared through Jordan Davis's body, less distorted ovally than the other 2 shots?
I'm not sure I understand the
Could the
question.
car have been moving once those second 2 shots were fired? Or can you tell?
I would not be able to tell.
Okay. But doctor, based on your autopsy findings, your view both externally and internally of these 3 gunshots to Jordan Davis, your demonstration here today, are the dowels consistent with those shots having been fired through that vehicle and into Jordan Davis's body and ending in the positions in which they did?
Yes, in my opinion, they are.
May I have just a moment with co-counsel?
Yes, ma'am.
I have no further questions for Dr. Simons, Judge.
All right, Mr. Stroller. Ladies and gentlemen, do you want to stand for just 1 second? I would prefer to finish this witness before we take our lunch break. So I just thought maybe you might want to stretch for a second. If not, that's what you do. Go right ahead while Mr. Stroller gets his mic ready to go.
Thank you.
And then what we'll do is Mr. Stroller will cross-examine the doctor, and then we'll take our lunch break. But I'd just like to conclude it. All right, Mr. Stroller?
Judge, may it please the court, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Simons, now, Ms. Corey asked you a lot of questions about these dowels, and you did a presentation, correct?
That's correct.
How many times did Ms. Corey keep saying the word assume this and assume that before she asked you a question?
I did not count.
And a lot of your testimony is based on assumptions that you don't truly know are fact. Is that correct?
No, my testimony is based on looking at a combination of the scene, meaning the vehicle, the dowel that was placed, the external aspect of the vehicle, and the injuries that I found, as well as the projectile and what I saw the other projectiles look like.
But that's also on assumptions Ms. Corey asked you to make. Isn't that what we heard?
I don't believe it's an assumption, so I'm not sure I follow your question.
Okay. Let me ask you this. How tall is Jordan Davis?
He is measured at 5 feet 11 inches.
And almost at 6 feet tall, if somebody is now trying to get behind a door, could that trajectory still hit him at the lower 10th rib and go to the 5th or 6th rib?
I would have to see the height of the Durango and the height of the shots from the ground before I could tell you that.
So you're saying if it's not to scale and you don't have it, you can't create a conclusion. Is that correct?
I'm saying I couldn't create a conclusion of him standing upright, but I have not operated under the conclusion that he was standing upright. I have been given information that he was a right rear compartment passenger.
And who gave you that information?
That is information that was provided by law enforcement.
Okay, and you're going on what they told you, is that correct?
Not having been at the scene
Yes,
and
ma'am.
not having been the primary investigator, I do go by what I'm told by law enforcement. That's correct.
And in the medical field or in anything, have you ever heard of a terminology of garbage in is garbage out?
Yes, I have heard that phrase.
And for the jury, if you're getting bad facts in, you're going to give bad facts out. It's almost like a mathematical equation. Would you agree?
No, because I do feel that although I don't necessarily go to the scene and don't necessarily have all the information at any one time, if something doesn't make sense to me, then I will raise questions. I won't just accept it as fact.
But let me ask you this. You do agree with the premises in your field, garbage in equals garbage out if you're making a conclusion.
I think that's true for anything where people pass information.
And that would even include your own testimony. I mean, you're a person, right?
I'm not sure I follow your question.
Judge, if I
Let's sustained, maybe you can try and find another way to ask it.
You just said, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's with every person. Garbage in could be garbage out to form a conclusion, correct?
In the general sense, that is correct.
Okay. How about in the medical sense? If a medical doctor is given bad information, could they make bad decisions as a doctor?
Well, I think given that we are thinking people, that we hope to find inconsistencies and again raise questions and raise issues. And so, if you're asking in respect to whether he could have been standing up as opposed to being seated in the vehicle, again, if you are going to try and pose to me that he was, present me with some information and I will look at that information and tell you whether or not I feel that it's plausible. Right now, I do feel that the information I was presented with is plausible.
But you were never given information by the state or law enforcement that he was outside the vehicle. Is that true?
I was never given any information that would allow me to make a determination that he was outside.
So the simple answer to my question was yes, you've never been given that information.
Well, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Now, if somebody lifts their leg up, and I'm a man, Judge, you mind if I move?
Yep, go right
Thank you, Judge. And again, if I move, now Dr. Simmons, if I lift my right leg up like this, am I almost looking like I'm in a seated anatomical position other than my left leg? My right leg would be up, my body's up, kind of looks like I'm seated if you kind of put a chair underneath my tush, right?
Sure.
Right? Would you have a clear shot of my scrotum from where you are? Would a bullet be able to travel underneath my right thigh into my left leg where wound number 2 is?
Not necessarily being able to see exactly anatomically where your scrotum is. It looks to me as if your thigh would be in the way, that your thigh would be in the way, and that
Okay.
your leg would have to be higher.
Correct. So if I'm even leaning down then, jumping into an SUV, you have a clear shot to my left leg, don't you?
I do, but what is the height? And as I said, without the height of those off the vehicle,
I understand that, but my question was, and do you want me to repeat it? Do you have a clear shot of my scrotum into my left thigh? Yes or no?
I don't think that a yes or no answer is that simple, because
Okay.
you're asking me to eliminate other factors that went into the decision-making process in this case. And that is a deformed bullet that, in my opinion, is too deformed to have only gone through thigh as opposed to having hit a hard object first, such as going through the door.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So let's say I'm behind a door and it goes through a door. I've got a door. Let's say you're there. You with me? Let's assume I have a door open right here between us. And now I'm jumping into the back seat. Is it going to go through the door, ma'am?
If it goes through the door and the door is open, you would have to be in a drastically different position than what you're in.
How about leaning down, leg up, jumping in? Is that possible?
Okay, so if you think about the angle at which a door would be open, and then you think about the angle that the thigh needs to be at, I would venture to guess that the position that you're in is not going to allow the bullet to go through the door and then turn back around and hit your thigh going this way. So from what you're showing me, I don't see that a path through an open door could have led to a path into the body. I don't see it.
But again, you were never given the factors of Jordan Davis being almost 6 feet tall, the height of a Durango, next to the height of someone sitting in a Volkswagen Jetta. Is that correct? Were you ever given those variables?
No, I was not given those variables.
So you can't form a conclusion today, even though you're saying no, you can't medically say no or scientifically because you don't have the variables, correct?
Well, what I would need would to be, again, I believe that the variables that I was given
By
Fit-
law enforcement,
fit with each other.
Okay.
And so that's the first step.
okay. And now,
If the second step is that you are going to pose another scenario, then we could start over and we could pose those with the facts.
and law enforcement never gave you another scenario, did they?
No, they did not.
The state attorney's office didn't give you another scenario, did they?
No, they did not.
And working with the medical examiners, you work with the state attorney's office very closely, do you not?
Not specifically, no. I work on each case equally with the defense and the state attorney. So the defense usually calls for the deposition, and then the state follows through ultimately with a pretrial. And so we have the same exposure.
How
And
many
in-
times have you testified for the state attorney's office as a medical examiner, or an assistant medical examiner? I apologize.
That's by formality. So I testify as to who calls me. And so I am testifying for the decedent. I am testifying for the facts and the examination that I've done,
Ma'am,
but I don't
Judge, I'm gonna-
testify for a
Judge, I'm
side.
going to ask her if she
Mrs.
stopped
Stroh.
non-responsive, Your Honor. I'm going to ask that it was not responsive. I asked her how many times she testified
Okay.
for the state.
I got it. All right, if you can just limit yourself to his question then, Doctor.
How many times have you testified and been called by the state attorney's office?
3 times, the 3 times that I've testified.
And how many times have you been called by defense?
I have been in 3 trials, so that would be none.
0, is that correct?
Yes, that would be
Okay.
correct.
Okay. And now you no longer work. You've resigned from the medical examiner's office, is that correct?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Now, do you have your report in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Do you have anything from the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer to show the toxicology of Jordan Davis?
I'm not a toxicologist. I don't keep that kind of information.
Ma'am, I did, Judge, again, non-responsive. I asked you, do you have any toxicology from a mass
Hang on.
chromatograph,
Hang
mass spectrometer,
Hang
gas
on.
chromatograph? I'm
Hang
sorry.
on. I don't know what that was.
Judge, it was Siri, and unless you know it, you can't disable it.
Well, we're up and out.
Do you have anything
No,
of the GCMS?
those do not routinely go into our charts. I do
Okay.
not have that here.
And that would be through the toxicologist?
Yes, it would.
And do you have any GCMS from the Shands Hospital reports from the medical side of it? Meaning,
I'm not aware that Shands performed any toxicological testing.
so the answer is no, you have nothing from Shands about toxicology either, correct?
Correct.
Okay, now, on your report, you indicate that there was no alcohol and no prescription medication or controlled substances, is that correct?
I indicate
If you look on
in
page
my
6, if you
report
can't
the
recall.
results of the toxicology testing, and those results were that none was detected.
Do you have a copy of the request for chemical examination?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and in that, without reading because it's not in evidence, isn't it true that the tox labs from the toxicologists are actually handwritten in by somebody?
Yes, that is true.
And then you take that handwriting and type it into your report on page 6, correct?
Either myself or one of the administrative assistants, that's correct. Somebody does type that in.
Can you go to page 6 of your examination report, please?
Yes.
Did you type that in, none detected, or did somebody type that in for you?
I proofread everything. I do not know, sitting here on the stand, who typed that in.
And the way you proofread it is you look at somebody else's handwritten notes saying
That-
none detected, is that true?
That is correct.
So you don't verify it, you just proofread it, is that true?
I look at the report results that are submitted to me on the request for chemical examination as they are submitted to me by the toxicologist, and I take those as fact.
Okay, and that's the handwritten notes?
And that is the handwritten notes.
And again, you don't do any verification of what the toxicologist did, that's not your job, correct?
That is not my job.
Now, we saw some abrasions, you testified to some abrasions, and you have no idea how they got there, correct?
That is correct.
And in your medical opinion and expertise, you have no idea how they got there, isn't that true?
I do have no idea how those abrasions might have occurred.
So again, the answer to my question is yes, that's true.
Yes, that is true.
Okay, and you don't know how long they've been there, isn't that true?
That is true.
They may not even be relevant whatsoever to this case, isn't that true?
I do consider them not relevant to this case in that they are not contributory to the lethal injury.
So again, the answer to my question was yes, that's true. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Now, in your report, Ms. Corey went over the trajectory of the first two wound tracks, but not the third. The one that is the perforating that goes in and out. That wound track is back to front, left to right, and slightly upward. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that would be completely different from wound number 2 that's coming in from right to left into that left thigh that gets embedded. And that one is slightly front to back, right to left, with no definite upward or downward deviation. Isn't that true?
That is true.
Okay. And did you ever get a copy of a primary source report from those toxicology results, or just the handwritten notes in your file?
It is not my custom to perform a service that I am not certified in. I do not interpret the raw data. That is the toxicologist's job, and it is not our office policy to have the doctors interpret raw data because it is not our jobs.
I didn't ask you to interpret it, ma'am. My question was, did you ever get a copy of the primary source report showing the toxicology results?
If you're asking about the raw data, no.
Not even the raw data. Are you familiar with the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer?
Yes, I am.
And it prints out a piece of paper with the results, right? It does have data on it, but it does give you results you can read as a medical doctor.
Okay.
Is that true? You're a medical doctor? Yes, ma'am?
I am a medical doctor.
Okay,
That
you
is
went
true.
through, you went through medical school. I'm sure you had to do
Yes.
some form of toxicology training.
Yes.
Okay. Would you be able to look at the results of that GCMS and see negative for drugs, negative for alcohol?
So normally, when we, for example, send out for toxicology testing or send out for anything, we get a finalized report by the specialist we've consulted. We don't ask for their raw data or their notes.
I didn't ask that. I asked, can you and do you have the ability to read it if you had it?
I will repeat my initial answer. I am not a certified toxicologist.
Dr. Simons, objection, ask and answer.
Sustain.
Nothing further, Judge.
Very briefly, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Simons, were there any signs of alcohol or drugs detected in Jordan Davis's body?
The toxicology results indicate that there were none.
Okay. Had there been any alcohol or drugs in Jordan Davis's body, would he still have died from the gunshot wounds?
Yes, he would have.
And how quickly would that chest wound have disabled Jordan Davis?
I believe that it would have been fatal in a matter of minutes.
Okay. Would he have been able to stand up after sustaining a gunshot that tore through his aorta?
Well, there is a possibility. There have been reported cases that he would have been able to move.
Okay. And doctor, is there anything that you've looked at based on the actual photographs from the crime scene, the dowel picture you saw, and your own autopsy that would lead you to believe that Jordan Davis was in any position other than seated in the back seat of that vehicle leaning towards the other side of the car?
There's nothing that I saw.
Thank you. No further questions.
Ms. should be excused?
Yes, sir.
Mr.
So
Stoll?
excused, Judge. Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Doctor. You're
Thank you.
excused. Yes.
State of Florida announces rest.
Ladies and gentlemen, the jury of the state of Florida has now rested their case, and so this comes at a very opportune time because I have to deal with some matters outside of your presence with them, and so we can use the lunch hour. Actually, I'm gonna have to give you a little bit longer lunch hour so they'll have a little bit of time to get a bite. And then we'll come back and see where we go. So it's 5 minutes after 12. I would normally say 5 after 1, but I'm going to say 1:30 today so I can have some extra time with the attorneys. So we'll resume at 1:30. Please do not discuss the case among yourselves or with others.